It's been a rough time in our country and our world, and man, I was up frankly late last night watching the fires burn in Minneapolis. We're not going to talk about any of that today. We are going to take a step back, and we're just going to get some insight. I think that will be a balm onto your troubled soul, perhaps. Today's guest is a gentleman named Joe Camp, and depending on your age, you might recognize his name. Some of you already know. That's the guy that wrote and directed those Benji movies. The dog. I grew up with that. Benji was just the greatest thing ever when I was a child, when I was growing up. But Joe Camp is much more than the Benji guy. That's just the thing that people probably recognize the most. He's a wonderful storyteller, author, and he's got a new book. You might have read The Soul of a Horse, The Lessons from the Herd. That book did fabulous. There were a bunch of iterations, spin-offs of that. But we're going to talk to someone who loves animals, loves nature, loves God. He's got a new book, and it is out right now. It just came out last week. It's called God Only Knows. Subtitle, Can You Trust Him with the Secret? So Joe Camp, welcome to Life Today Live. It is an honor to talk to you today.
It is an honor to be here. I've heard so much about you, and I recently have watched several of your shows, and I'm just tickled to death.
Oh, well, great. I appreciate it. Now, explain to everybody where you are, because it looks very serene out there. Beautiful.
Actually, we are at the end of a road that ends in our garage with hills all the way around it, about an hour south of Nashville.
Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, I thought you were in California for some reason. Probably because that's what your Skype ID says. So
there was a time.
There was a time. Okay, I know. Shoot, man, you are in some beautiful country up there. You have a lot of horses out there, right?
Yes, we've had 7 for quite some time, and a couple of weeks ago we went up to 8 by rescuing one that was about to be put down.
Before we get into the new book. Talk a little bit about the horses, because that's been a major part of your life, and I'm curious why you connected with horses so well.
Well, actually, it's pretty much God's fault, and and Kathleen. He and Kathleen, I think, got together on that, because the last Benji movie that I did. I have to begin by saying 3 of the 5 Benji movies were in the top 10% of box office grosses for the year.
Amazing.
This one wasn't. The last one that I did wasn't. It was probably a huge mistake, but it had to be done. And there's a whole afterward in The Soul of a Horse that explains that, because I was so in the dumps when the movie did not. I mean, I was so convinced that God was in the middle of all of it, and step by step by step, and then it didn't work. And the day that I think it was 2 days after it opened, I was on Hank Hanegraaff's show out in California, and it was, I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go in. And when I went in, I was actually bawling, and had Benji with me. And said, "What the heck's going on?" And that's how the book begins, actually, with this story, because he said, "How many people have seen that movie already?" And I said, "Probably 1 million." He said, "Do you have any clue how much you have affected 1 million people in this country?"
Mm-hmm.
Get up off that chair and let's go in there and sell some tickets. and he's the one that said, "You will be surprised what comes out of this. You will, when you look back on this conversation, you will see what God had in mind and where He was going with it." And probably the one that wrapped everything up with a bow and tied it for me, because it's all true. That's where the whole horse thing came from. Kathleen decided, and the people that we had met along the promotional way of the movie were integral in getting the first Soul of the Horse book published. And so it was an amazing set of affairs. And I mean, I've always loved horses, but it's always been far. And, I haven't been close to them. It was dogs for me.
Yeah.
Of course, so a lot of what the book is about is the miseries and the just terrible times we had making that movie, that first movie, and then getting it out and getting it distributed. And so, I still needed some help along the way, and I still needed to trust completely. And by the time we got to that point, I did, because he showed me that there was a whole nother need for me out there. And the Soul of a Horse is actually a story, a tale of what we found when we got into horses without a clue.
Okay, yeah, I'd like you to tell people that aren't familiar with it what it's all about.
Yeah, when we got, well, it started with Kathleen deciding that she needed to take me on a trail ride because I was so down in the dumps, and we had just bought a house out in the sticks in San Diego County, and it happened to have a couple of stalls on it. We'd sit there and talk about, boy, wouldn't it be nice if there were a couple of horses wandering around in the stalls as we sat out watching the sunset in the evening and whatnot. And somehow the subject of a trail ride came up, and she set up she drugged me out of bed on my birthday and said, get in the car. Didn't tell me where we were going. We pull into this park down in Escondido, and there was a huge horse trailer with 3 horses out, tied and saddled. And she said, you said it would be nice to go on a trail ride sometime. Today's the day. Happy birthday. And literally 2 weeks later, we owned 3 horses.
I'm picturing Billy Crystal and City Slickers that day. Was it a little bit of an experience for you?
So I was so absolutely certain that I was not going to let anybody know that I didn't know anything about horses. Kathleen was scared to death, and I didn't even know it until 5 or 6 months later. But she was doing this for me, and literally when I came back and I said, we need to go look at some horses, and she said, whoa, wait, we just went on a trail ride. And I can tell you for sure that a 6-hour trail ride is not a good reason to go out and buy 3 horses. You need to start somewhere, and that needs to start with knowledge. And we didn't any. So it was kind of a joke in the beginning, but everybody I was asking, doing a lot of research, a lot of talk with people who knew horses and all this, and the answers, I'm a person who loves logic to a fault, probably. And the answers I was getting about what you do and how you take care of horses and etc. wasn't making any sense when you lay it up next to how they evolved in the wild, and what their bodies are used to. And they move 10 to 15, 20 miles a day when they're in the wild, and all of their body functions are used to that. And the way they eat, the way they drink, they're all used to that. And the worst thing you can do for a horse is put it in the stall. And so as those things evolved, I finally reached a point where I said, I got to do something. I got to write a book about it. She said, well, you've never written a book. Well, I got to do it because it's there. And so I told the whole story as we were discovering it, we would come up to the next thing and be just totally astounded that people were actually doing this to these horses. And that just increased the passion even more to get it right and to get it out there. And so it was certainly a labor of love, and it's responded that way. It's in its 17th printing right now.
Yeah. So what would you say are some of the bigger truths that you learned through your experience with the horses, but not necessarily simply about a horse, something greater?
Uh, huh. I'm not sure I've ever been asked that question before.
Well,
Yeah.
we talk about trust, we talk about being led, those sorts of things, and then
Well,
we
I
talk
think
about those.
the main thing that ultimately came out of all of it is that what we're asking the horses is simply what God is asking of us.
Right.
Trust me, and I will take care of you. And that's what we're asking the horse to do. And when it happens, it is amazing. Because the horse has to give the trust. You can't reel it out of him. You can't squeeze it out of him. You can't train it out of him. You've got to let the horse make the decision to say, okay, I get it. I trust you. And when that's done, everything changes. Literally everything changes. And that was kind of a turning point for me when that happened with my first horse, because it was, like I say, it was just totally amazing that suddenly I had this willing partner, and I didn't have a clue. He was teaching me, and I was, and uh, and it was fascinating. We wound up pretty quickly having 6 horses, but with that is an overlying truth that is for sure. And I was so late coming to that conclusion, that it was, and the analogy of what I had been asking the horses to do is exactly what God's been asking me to do, and I better start getting it right.
Yeah, well, I want to ask about that. I want to hear a little bit about sort of your relationship with God and how that did come about. You learned to trust Him. I want to let people know that we are talking to Joe Camp, movie director and writer, author, and his new book, God Only Knows, and we'll get into this real quick, is out now. It is available just in the last week. So some great lessons from nature, from animals, from life, from his own experience. And so, Joe, you talk about being a little bit late to some of the realizations of what it means to trust God in your own life. Walk us through some of that.
Well, I've been the typical Christian, I guess, all my life. I grew up with my parents in the church, and God was there, and I knew He was there somewhere, and that's about as far as it went. And about halfway through the preliminary process of moving towards the original movie Benji, we were trying to break into Hollywood writing and sitcom writing, and there was some stuff in there that God wanted me to have, but it didn't have anything to do with going out to Hollywood. So it's in the book, and I won't take the time to tell you the whole story, but there was a cohort with me, and we were meeting with Jerry Van Dyke, Dick Van Dyke's brother, and trying to just get information. We were in Dallas. We were living in Dallas and trying to do the Hollywood thing, which is not the easiest thing in the world. And at the very time that Jerry Van Dyke was in town for a show, Vonda K. Van Dyke, who was a Miss America at the time, was in town at the First Baptist Church, which was Irwin's church. And he saw this immediate promotional possibility of getting the 2 Van Dykes together and for their youth group at the church, which was at that time, I think, the largest Baptist church in the country. And I just flew off the handle. I said, you don't even open your mouth. This guy's nice enough to see us and talk to us about writing. He had just had one series shut down on him and had another one starting. And so he knew some do's and don'ts at least. And he says, just please don't do that. Don't start inviting him to your church just because. And so we're cut to 30 minutes into the meeting, and it was finally drying up because he wasn't a writer, and that's what we were trying to do. And it was a nice conversation. He was a wonderful person, but he just wasn't going anywhere. And so we finally began to say our goodbyes, and we got to the door. He said, y'all wait a minute. And he looks over at Irwin and he says, you're Southern Baptist, right? He said, yeah, that's right. He says, come on back in here for a minute. And it turns out he and his brother, Dick Van Dyke, had been working on a situation comedy about a young minister fresh out of seminary who was a surfer, unmarried, all the things that back in that day were, you just didn't do on television in the church. And so he wanted to try out the idea on, on us, and particularly on Irwin. And Irwin was all wrapped up in the Southern Baptist Convention and all that stuff in Fort Worth, and he was over there all the time, and a terrific guy, and just more fun than you could ask for too. But anyway, we go through all of that, and it's already spinning around in my brain. And I asked him at one point, I said, "Well, has anything been written on this? Is there a pilot?" And Jerry said, "No." And he got up, and it had to be in the cool of winter because the windows were all fogged up. I remember that. And he went to the window and started drawing circles. But if one happened to turn up on my doorstep and I liked it, he poked the hole in the thing. And he, in effect, was inviting us for spec.
Yeah.
But to take a strike at the pilot for the show. And I mean, all of our hearts were just beating like crazy in different directions, probably.
Yeah, right.
Oh, we're there. And so we finally say goodbye, and he's going to be there for a week, so we're going to get back together and talk some more, and et cetera, and et cetera. And we walk out the door, and Irwin stops in the door, and he says, "Joe's going to kill me, but I got to tell you this story, Jerry." And he told a story about Von K. Van Dyke and wanting him to come over to the church and all of that, and Jerry was very nice. He said, "Well, I'd be happy to have done it, but it conflicts with my show. The timing conflicts with my show at the nightclub downstairs." And he said, "But we'll see. We'll talk some more when it is." And so we walk out the door, just happy as clams. And I have been completely rebuffed because I had made him swear he would never say anything about it, and he did. And I went home that night and went into my closet and found my dusty Bible, took it out, and I think I read all night long.
Wow.
Because that was. I mean, God couldn't have been more clear if he had grabbed me by the throat and said, "Look, fool, I've gone to a lot of trouble to set this up. Let the man talk." And when he did, is when things started happening. And so it was a great moment for me, and it's what really began my true relationship with God. Because up until that point, it was just this is the way it's supposed to be. But then it began to get very personal very quick, and much to God's chagrin, I was talking to him many times a day.
It's amazing what happens when we decide that we'll let God lead instead of us leading.
There are so many devastations in my life that I thought were the end of the world that had to happen exactly as he orchestrated them, or we wouldn't be talking today.
That's interesting.
The very first one was I wanted to go to UCLA because I wanted to. I knew at 8 years old, sitting in a theater in Little Rock, Arkansas, watching the end of a Disney movie, as they ran off into the sunset and whatnot, and tears coming down my cheeks, waiting for my dad to come grab me to take me home. And I knew at that moment that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be the person that was making me feel so good that I was crying happy tears. And I didn't even know who that person was. But that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to make people happy. And that was at 8 years old. I was 34 before I was doing it. And the whole point of this book is that you can achieve anything you want to achieve in this life if you want it bad enough to let God lead you through it. And it doesn't matter how impossible it is, because he can solve all those problems, and he will, because he put the passion in your heart in the first place, and he'll use it to make your life extraordinary. And that's the great thing that that happened, to me,
Yeah.
all the way through this process is when I finally began, you know, when all after the movie was made, we took it out to Hollywood, and every distributor in town turned it down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we
Mm-hmm.
went back to Dallas with our tail between our legs, with a movie that we either had to throw in the trash or figure out.
Yeah.
And what did I know about distribution? That's what my chief investor kept telling me.
Yeah. Well, and back in that time period, distribution was everything. If you didn't have distribution, you were done.
Yeah, it was it was a case. But when it finally hit me in the face, and hit me so hard that it lasted for a long time, forever, is that when he cut me off at UCLA, it was because he didn't want me anywhere near LA.
Yeah.
If I'd gone to UCLA, I'd have wound up in the mainstream system out there somehow, and Benji would have never been made, because Hollywood would have never made Benji. It's a movie that they don't know how or what to do with.
Mm-hmm.
And what he was saying is, you go back to Ole Miss and stay with marketing and advertising, because you're going to need it when they turn your movie down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what it was, because I had the confidence that I could do this, that I would have never had if I hadn't had that background, the marketing and the advertising background. And so and when that began to happen, and I began to see at every turn and point what he was doing, he put me in the hands of one of the best writers in Hollywood, who was doing it. You remember a series called That Girl with Danny Thomas's daughter?
Yeah, I do. I do. Was it Marlo Thomas?
Marlo Thomas, yeah. And this guy was producing that show, and his first line to me was, "Love the way you write, love the way you capture the characters and everything. Your story structure sucks." And so that began something that I needed terribly. I needed to know how to take the smallest of ideas, and after all, this was a dog,
Yeah. Right.
smallest of ideas, and pull people in such a manner that they would live the story with the dog, not with the person who owns the dog, who has to kill the dog because he's eating the chickens or something. This is, you're in the heart and soul of this dog from start to finish. And I had a lot to learn about how to mold and craft that. And when I left Danny Arnold, the producer I'm talking about, I knew it. I had it. He's probably responsible as anybody else for
yeah. There's a lesson right there. It's always important that we be open to learning and not think that we've arrived and we know it all. Let me ask you this, because you talk about how if you have the persistence, you can accomplish those dreams. Yet some of your dreams were never accomplished at least the way you thought that they would be, and that comes down to a lot of times God's ways not necessarily being our ways. When we have an idea, when we have a vision, and we feel like it's from the Lord, how do we know the difference between opposition that we need to overcome versus God pushing us in a different direction for reasons we just can't see?
Well, that's what most of it's going to be. And that's why this book, I think, is so important, because over time, the pieces begin to come back together, and you begin to see that God's been in control the whole time. Lee DeMang says that it's a God implanted passion, dream, when it's too expensive, it's unreasonable, and there's another that he said, but it's all exactly the same. And he says, because then that God has to be involved in order for it to happen. Yeah. And that gives you a leg up, which I didn't have at the time, because I was late in the process of finding out that, oh my goodness, look at this. And he has been in charge from the very beginning. And it's so funny to see how he cut me off at Hollywood every time. You know, we'd get right up to the edge with Danny Arnold. We got right up to the edge with that girl, had a story Danny Arnold loved, and we were going to be able to write the script the next season. And Danny Arnold and Danny Thomas stepped in and did a audience test, ASI test on the shows that people liked the best, and they all had to do with the love triangle between her and her boyfriend and some third party. And so that's what they were going to do. This story didn't have anything to do with it. It was all about an old janitor who lived in the building. But that was going to be, we had 5 or 6 of those along the line, and they got cut off every time. Bam. But I was learning something from them at the same time. He wanted me to spend that time with Danny Arnold. He just didn't want me to make the deal, because it would have screwed up Benji completely. And we'd have gone in the wrong direction probably, and not following him. It's such a learning, and that's why it took for me an entire book. I can't sit down and say, this is why you ought to love God. This is why you ought to love God. You know, it's a whole, it's a lifetime of.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we're talking to Joe Camp and his chickens. And he's got a new book. We can hear him in the background. And a new book called God Only Knows. What's the secret here in the subtitle? It says, "Can you trust him with the secret?" What was your secret?
Well, the secret was that I didn't know that he was in control in the beginning. And once I began to see that he was in control, I had no clue which way he was going. But I did learn very quickly that not giving up is part of the process. You got to believe God so strongly, believe in God so strongly, that you just keep going no matter what. I don't like going this way. This is not what I had planned. I wanted to go over here. But you do it, and you just keep going, because, you know, for God, there is no losing. There's winning and learning. And if you give up, you lose. You fail. If you don't give up, and there's a lot of funny stories about that. If you never give up, you can never fail.
Yep.
And that's a good lesson to learn right there. If you can't stop at the obstacle, because any good dream is going to throw obstacle after obstacle after obstacle at you, and you've got to know and understand and learn how to get a path, go under them, over them, around them, whatever it's going to take. And that was a huge lesson in the whole thing, is that, don't fight God on what he has laid out in front of you. There's a reason for it. There's a purpose. And, there's the old proverb or whatever, is what God allows in his providence often seems to contradict his purpose. And that's an attempt at somebody to try to explain all this, but it's not actually correct, because I looked at it and said, logic again, wait a minute. Why could it seem that it's going to contradict his purpose? God's purpose is perfect. He doesn't contradict his own purpose. And so that helped me to lead me by the nose, or let him lead me by the nose out in the real world. Yeah.
Proverbs also says that basically it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up. And we look at a boxing match. The guy who loses is not the guy that gets knocked down, as most people think. It's the guy who doesn't get back up. That's the only way you lose. Joe, you're in your late 60s, very late 60s. Yeah.
Yeah. You keep moving.
What is in store? What is in store for you? Are you spending much time there in the beauty?
Late 60s, or when I got married 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm actually 81 at this point, and still have the fire in the belly. So, and now God is heavily involved in that, as you'll see if you get a chance to, to actually open the pages and read this book, as busy as you are. But it is, we're moving forward, and every way that we can come up with, and looking for that, that magical spot where God is saying, "This is where I want you,
Mm.
and what I want you to be doing," and being open, and which in itself is a little difficult for me because I like to keep moving, and between not getting the message fully and this pandemic business, it has been a challenge to be locked up. At least we got some property to be locked up on, and in our farm and barn, and feeding horses twice a day, all of that. And
looks beautiful. And come on, as a writer, being locked up isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes we do that to ourselves just so we can get things done. Have you found any creative juices flowing while you've been, minimizing your travel?
Yeah, here, there, and yonder, and going. And what I have found in recent years that is new to me is to being so open to what God has planned for me.
Yeah.
That it may be too easy, or something. Back when I was having fights with him, and learning something from it, seemed like a more logical approach to it than just sitting around in a pandemic. But I'm having my little small ones. I think I mentioned to you the horse that was about to be put down for no reason at all, other than it's too much trouble to give this horse who has COPD her medication every day. COPD can be handled with medication and doing the proper stuff with the horse.
Yeah. So now that horse is there on your property.
Yeah, and so sweet, and I love her dearly, and it's really exciting to me. And I still cry when she comes up and we do. Horses blow in each other's noses. That's the way they say hello. And so the first thing I like to do with a new horse is blow in their nose and get them that pattern that I'm one of you, so come on. And anytime that happens with her these days, I still tear up because she would have, if God hadn't placed me at that vet's place within a 5-minute span, I would have never known this was happening, and that horse was being brought there to be put down because it was too much trouble to the people who had it.
Yeah.
And which got relatively furious. Kathleen over there, and then bringing her home. And there was a tarp out on the side of the building where the vet's office was, and that's what she would have been under next morning, waiting for some animal disposal service to come by and pick her up. And I see her alive and happy every day, several times a day. It just makes my day too.
Yeah, that's great. You spent some time in Texas, so maybe you've heard the saying from, I don't know if it's a Texas thing, but they did say it in Texas years ago. You can tell the mettle of a man by the way he treats his horse. And right, and I can tell that you, Joe Camp, are a good man, and appreciate all the wisdom you've shared, the love of God's creation, and yet understanding that there is a creator behind it, and being open to willing to learn your entire life and continue learning, and learn from animals, learn from people, learn from battles and fights and obstacles. It's a great testimony, and I appreciate you taking the time to share it today on Life Today Live.
My pleasure.
And appreciate the rest of you guys. Hope you guys have a great weekend, and we will be back next week. We have more interviews, and so feel free to share these. If you haven't subscribed or followed Life Today TV on your social media channels, do that now, and we will just continue to bring you great uplifting and challenging and interesting interviews and stories just to help you grow and get you through your day, get you through your week, and encourage you. I will see you again next time on Life Today Live.